I think one of the decisions we had to make as a company was we needed to compete at the global level in order to stay relevant, in order to ensure that we are bringing the best to our customers in Asia and at the same time cross-pollinating best practices in Asia to customers. And so that's a through train journey.
So it's about 8-9 months that you've been in the US.
Yes, that's correct.
My first question really is, spent a lot of your career exploring the organisational culture here in Singapore and Asia, and now doing the same, roughly the same sort of role in the US. Do you see any sort of real differences or similarities in that kind of employee experience and the organisational culture?
Yeah, I see a lot more similarities than differences. Everything that Anna showed earlier in terms of that connection with the company, in terms of the need for engagement, the need to be all kind of rowing in the same direction, I think that's felt equally strongly in both markets. Labor is expensive in America. That ROI on engagement is a lot more tangible. And you see a greater willingness to make that investment. And there's less of a why should we do this and more of a how should we do this. Right? So I think that's maybe a little bit of that difference that I'm seeing.
In terms of measuring?
In terms of measuring, or even in terms of how do I engage my employees better.
Okay.
And I know, having worked here for a while, there's sometimes that challenge that HR has to go to management and say, we need to invest in employee engagement. And first question is why? And already I'm giving them a job, but I still have to make them happy. And none of you guys are in the room. As a company, except
And is it the same focus? Engagement is still a really sort of strong metric amongst our clients here in Asia. Is that also a commonly measured metric in the US?
Very much. I think the culture of continuous listening is a little bit stronger, I would say, or it's been a lot more socialized. Maybe I'm also a little bit biased because based in Silicon Valley, this is where they've experimented a lot in this area. So you see a lot more of that. In fact, the pendulum has swung from I'm going to pulse every month to every quarter, and then now okay, let's think about this more strategically, and how do we cater our listening strategies to be a little bit more contextual to the phase of the employee journey that our employees are at, because doing monthly census surveys with everybody just doesn't make sense. It's just operationally very difficult. The analysis is not that meaningful, and in terms of how do you translate that into any kind of actions, it's difficult. So I do see a little bit more willingness to push the envelope in terms of trying out new things. I can go on for, I can share a little bit more of the experiments that I've seen that have succeeded and failed. So I'll give you an example. So I was speaking to one of the people scientists at Meta, Facebook, right? And they have tried everything from daily rotating samples, they've tried context specific, they've tried, and one of the more successful experiments for a while was they'll ask survey questions on engagement, and then after every question repeat that and say, how important was that to you as an employee? And as an analyst, oh yes, that's so smart. But then on the other hand, you put your business hat on, you're like, wow, that doubles the length of the questionnaire. And then you said, yeah, that's true, it did double the length of the questionnaire, the response rates dropped, and so we canned that after 2 cycles and we went back to more rotating sample questions. You see a lot of this. Microsoft does a bit of that kind of rotating sample. I'm sure you've encountered that before. So you see a lot more willingness to try out different things and to fail, right? And there's a lot of these initiatives fail, like monthly pulse survey, very quickly was the time.
So one of the questions that we always get from clients is, we're being asked to help more and more to set these kind of employee listening strategies. Perhaps every second year you did a big employee engagement survey, and now people are thinking, actually we'd like to do an onboarding survey or perhaps an exit, but we also want to know how people feel about the new office space, and help us just to sort of this out, which is really interesting work for us, of course. But the issue becomes who manages all this data and who drives the action planning. And so we see it working really well with organisations that have a nice big EX team, and you have a bunch of org psychs and analysts that can just spend their whole day doing this sort of stuff. When you describe this in some of the larger companies in the US, how do they structure those teams or that workload?
Absolutely, I think more willingness to make that investment in the headcount, both in terms of headcount and the tooling and the support outside the organization. I'll give you an example. Amazon has more than 500,000 employees, right? Their team that's focused purely on, they call it the connections team, right? That's 30 plus man team. Just to do that, set up the analysis, ensure that the data flows well from all the different areas, ensure that insights are coming out at the right level of frequency, the right people.
Yeah.
Walmart, they have a centralized listening team, but every business partner that works together with one of the large business units, they function as an effective CHRO and they run their own stuff as well.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot more willingness to invest in that. In terms of ratios, you find that for the large organizations, you get maybe, so say at Walmart, you maybe get like one HR headcount per 700 employees, which is pretty high for an organization size of Walmart.
Yeah.
For smaller organizations, you get maybe between 1 to 100 to 1 to 50.
Yeah.
So there is that willingness to invest in HR. But again, I'll caveat that to say that HR is still a function that struggles to command like solid budgets within organizations. It's always an ROI conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And we were chatting with the lady earlier on, about how we can really build out that ROI when we connect the employee data with data that the other C-suite are super interested in, whether it's customer or patient data was the example. Sorry, we were chatting about the patient data. And what I've always seen as well is that the conversation really catches the attention of the sort of C-suite when it's not just about this is our HR data, so this is the impact we have on our customers, this is on productivity, on safety incidents, on all these things that cost the business a lot of money, a focus of them. Is that something that you see being done as well, that kind of linkage, correlating those data sets?
Definitely. The people analytics community is a lot more, I would say, mature. So you would find people that have been in people analytics for almost a decade now already. And there's a relatively large community of them.
Mm-hmm.
They go from company to company. Some of them have set up people analytics technology firms and they've gone back in-house. It's a more mature function within HR. But I've come across many CHROs who have also been CFAs or who also hold finance degrees. And you find that I think businesses are increasingly demanding this of the HR function.
One of my sort of pet projects was always this idea of putting the chief marketing officer into the HR role, because they're very good at data and they're very good at interpreting and finding connection and stuff like segmenting customers they do all the time, and we're only just starting to really do that in the employee space. I always thought that would be a very interesting switch of skill sets and to do. The perennial problem that we always face as well is the ability to move from data to action. So we have a lot of our projects are super efficient. We collect 10,000 data points and we make a whole bunch of laundry reports and we present them back to the client. And then there's this moment where everyone goes, oh gosh, now I need to create action. I need managers to pick up the data. I need them to start demonstrating career paths to people, or I need them to start doing. Have you got any nice suggestions or things that you've seen done perhaps slightly differently in that space, in that side of the world?
So I would say that some of the best practices around this that I've encountered are not that different from some of the best organizations you see here, where to a certain extent, your survey data and your HR actions or your management actions, they run in parallel. Right? The survey data doesn't drive management action so much, but you have a strategy, management action then takes place, and your survey data gives you input to course correct whether your management action is working or not working, right? And then shift from that. I think that decoupling is healthy because you're less reactive, right? Because if you're running pulse surveys, say once every quarter, and you're having to create new action plans every quarter, it becomes very disjointed to the employees and super reactive to whatever the data is telling you. But if you have a strategy already and you're implementing it, then it really is a pulse check. Am I on track? Am I off track? What changes do I need to make? And it becomes less of a let's come up with a brand new action plan, but more of a here's how we should shift our strategy. I see that here too, so to be honest, I don't think it's a uniquely American thing.
Yeah. I was with a client in Dubai actually, a bank, and they asked us to give them more advice on how to action plan. And we went through everything that they did, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like they're totally the best in class. You know, they had their engagement champions, they had their regular check-ins, they had actions tied to their balanced scorecard, not scores, but actions that people see. They just had it all nailed, and I was just like, I think you're pretty good actually. You know, I don't see anything radically different.
To pull on this thread a little bit more, I think ultimately, what is the organization going to invest time, effort, and resources into, right? It's not responding to a survey, but it's what are your business objectives? What's your business strategy? How does that flow into your leadership and management strategy? How should leaders drive action on the ground, like that supports what your business needs.
Yeah.
The employee surveys give you really good data on whether your management action is getting traction or not with the people. The moment you put the survey at the forefront, it's like the cart before the horse, right? And everyone down the line, like I can see HRBP struggling all the time where they're forcing almost compliance.
It becomes like response rates.
Yeah, like with response rates, have you keyed in your action plans into the tracker? Why do I need to key so that I can track it?
Yeah.
What are you tracking it for?
Yeah.
So there's that whole friction that I think we're still, I would say 80-90% of the market hasn't quite overcome yet.
Yeah. And actually the same example, I did a series of leadership sessions, and every single leader, not one of them was like, why are we doing this anyway? It's just a bit of a checkbox, and let me just get through this meeting. All of them understood why the employee experience and perceptions mattered to them in their risk function, or them in their marketing function, or them in their retail function. And it was like, I just sat there, I thought, I don't know the last time I've done 20 sessions with leaders, and not one of them has just been like, HR, I don't need to do this. So they 100% understood exactly this, that the cart was behind them, that was going to help them drive that. Really, really impressive.
I don't think it's something that we always see.
No,
And I think
no,
when I look across some of the work I do in APAC, I definitely do still see too many organisations where people come to us almost trying to game the system. And I think sometimes when you're there as a consultant and not the HR team, they'll be like, yeah, but what can I do I just need to make the engagement score better? What can I tell people while they're filling in the survey to make the engagement score better? I recently had to add for a client, a factory-based client in APAC, we had to add in all these specific pre-survey briefings where we gave really clear advice on what you must not do. Hover over someone's computer basically and make them fill it in. And you would think that is moving away, and yet these are clients who might be working with us for a few years, but changing those attitudes is really hard. I think that attitude really has to start from the top. And I think at CHRO level, but also then that C-suite level. How they react and respond to that data is massive. And I think we've still got more work to do there.
Yeah.
Some cases. And also acknowledge that then surveys aren't always the right way to listen in some of those environments. So we've done a lot of work using digital focus groups, a tool called Remesh, that gets you a lot more qualitative data and gets in under the hood of those organizations where sometimes we see a stream of positive, no varied responses otherwise. And I think we've been trying to experiment more there and look at where maybe surveys have their limitations in certain organizations.
Yeah.
Yeah, to extend that point, actually, I think one of the things that has resonated a lot with our customer base in the US is almost like what Hannah was showing in terms of that driver analysis to understand what are the things that matter instead of employee engagement, but they will look at things like, okay, I'm trying to improve my retention rates, I'm trying to improve my customer experience, and to understand what of all the different items that we're evaluating in our surveys, like what has the biggest impact on this strategic goal that I'm trying to accomplish. I think moving away from a really basic top three, bottom three analysis towards what actually moves the needle for me, I think that has resonated really well, I'll say globally for us. And I think as an analyst, it makes sense. Why not?
Yeah. We look at the drivers of customer satisfaction, for example.
Exactly.
Again, sorry to bring this same example. But being empowered, having autonomy, working well together as a team, those things are really highly linked to positive customer satisfaction. And you get it why, because if I go up to someone in a hotel or a hospital and they say, oh, I need to talk to my manager, you're not solving problems. If people are empowered and autonomized, then they can move forward. And the other thing that the psychological safety we're talking a lot about at the moment, we've been doing a lot of work in the risk space, predominantly with financial services organisations, on why is the culture of risk so poor? And you often see very low psychological safety, so people don't feel safe to call out something. There's a big risk of something happening here. So, to your point, what's the organisation trying to achieve? And therefore, what drives it and what behaviours should we really focus on? And engagement is an easy one to pick, but it's not always the most relevant. Customer sat, risk, innovation, these are all other areas that we might focus on with a client.
And I do want to make a comment about how fortunate I feel for us in Asia sometimes that we don't have to worry about the litigiousness of the workforce. A lot of HR policy in the US tends to revolve around the fact that HR is the guardian against employees bringing lawsuits against the company. I was shocked to find out that more than half of the companies in the US have been sued by employees.
Yeah.
And anything you do, there's that legal lens to it.
Yeah.
Even when it comes to employee surveys and documentation, there's this element of discoverability. So if you were my boss and I told him I was suffering from cancer, and he recorded that down somewhere in Workday or whatever, and 2 weeks later there's a restructuring and I'm fired, I can come back and sue the company for unjust firing because, hey, you fired me just because I had cancer. It's recorded in the system. There's this element of almost fear that you have in HR that in some way someone's going to be out to get you. The flip side is on the survey element, it's very hard to force American workers to answer in a particular way to a survey. There's this federated, rugged individualism. I'm going to do me, and, and I don't care what you guys think. I'm very open about criticizing my boss if he's doing something that I don't believe in. And so all of this comes out in the survey, and to a certain extent, I go through open-ended responses, and I'm like, whoa, this is very colorful and very verbose. There's a lot of content here, far more than I'm used to in Asia.
You shared a comment from someone the other day to me from a client who we won't mention. Was it 15 pages long comment? You're like, wow.
You cease to, I mean, I think that's one of the most fun parts of my job. You never cease to amaze you, the type of thing people write.
And then we had another client the other day saying that they wanted to I was like, really? Maybe it's my Dutch background. Say it as it is, and just hear it and take it on the nose. And why ask them and then clean it out? Anyway, sorry, I could ramble on for ages around when Johannes and I first worked. When I first started my career when I was about 20 or something, I remember doing a project for Philips, and there were like, I think 600,000 paper questionnaires sent around the world, and then they were all gathered back again into London, because that was a cheap place to do it, apparently not. And all the data entry was done, and then somebody typed out the comments of every single paper questionnaire, 600,000, in all these different languages, so people that could type in Chinese and Thai, and then all of those comments were sent for translation, then they all came back in English, and then we started looking at them. Can you imagine? So that's 6 weeks after the data was surveyed, we had a file that we could start working. And then we read them one by one. And at the time, I remember we could do control find, and you had to blank it out, and control find another square word, you had to blank it out. So you went through this thousands and thousands, oh my god, it was a nightmare. But of course now, comments can be machine translated. You type them in first of all, so you're doing an online survey, so the next day, the next minute you have the survey, the things. You put them through a machine translation, put them all into English or French or Dutch or whatever language you want to look at the comments in. You have NLP that sort of starts theming stuff. I want to see all the comments that are positive around my career. I want to see all the comments that are negative around my career. I want to see the connectivity between comments. If I'm talking about my boss, am I also talking about my sense of being valued, or what else am I talking about? And so that world has changed so much. I would say that's the one thing that's really shifted.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. That's huge. The ability to look at both the aggregate level summary of data using NLP, AI. Back at Gallup, we used to have this role that was a coder role. Then we read through all of these verbatim and code it under particular topics. And now it's just done like that with AI. And there's this nice bubble chart that you can produce with sentiment and topic that used to used to take weeks.
I think that connectedness between the top, for a few years we've been able to use various tools to help us theme comments. I feel like in the last year there's been a lot of progress on, okay, don't just tell us what are the common themes, but actually show us connection between those topics and where that is in the organisation. And also just some really practical stuff like we now in Mercer, my AI pick out are the most representative comments for me, so it's not someone like me anymore. Even for big presentations, you would have still had to read through and say, what's the biggest theme? Some of that kind of work is being cut down, and you're able to give those insights now to every single manager, right? Not just at that executive level, which I think is good. But I think there's probably quite a bit more to come on the qualitative piece, and I also think surveying is going to move away from questions and percentages even more because of some of these advancements.
But actually, I think beyond the analysis of open-ended, one low-hanging fruit that you can always do is to actually use the qualitative data that you collected to explain the quantitative scores. Something that I always like to do is to look at the low-scoring drivers, the low-scoring topics or the high-impact topics, and then go back to the open-ended and see what context. Can you put some context behind why is it low-scoring? For example, if recognition is scoring very low, go back to the contextual side and pick out recognition topic and see what people are actually saying about that topic. So then all of a sudden, it explains about why the score, the quantitative score is the way it is.
And it will likely point you to a
And then it will probably point to a yes action plan.
I have a question for CheeTung. Benedict here,
Hi, Ben.
from Fireside. I'm across an organization where the engagement score is high, but then the retention is low.
Yes.
Meaning that people are so marketable that they can find job easily, but they are quite happy with the organization during their time. From the senior management point of view is that you are highly engaged, you should want to stay in the company. But there are many reasons, especially in this multi-generation era when people don't stay with us a long time. We celebrate their success because they are more marketable, they leave us. But at the same time, there's always this question being asked at the ES that how long will you stay with the organization and so on and so forth. So maybe can you give some insights that how to handle this? The manager always says that how to make them even more happier to want to be with us and a lot of choice.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and just discussing this last week actually. Definitely yes, there are definitely organizations that see that. I would say that they're in the minority, but every time my first instinct as an analyst is to dig into the segments of the data, right? Because okay, so assuming that the integrity of the data is solid, then the first step that I would do is to look at different segments. So for example, if you have 5 different markets, and you're seeing at the high level engagement is high, but attrition is high as well. You want to break that data down to say, all right, let's split it across the markets. Where's our attrition coming from? Let's look at those areas and see if those are pockets of disengagement actually. And at least in my experience, that would be like 70% of the cases where you have a team or a few teams where the manager just really sucks and they're just driving people away. There are occasions where post-COVID actually, in a couple of years after COVID, where 21, 22, you'll see a few companies that experience this as well, like high engagement, but because suddenly the workforce was hiring again. So you see a little bit of that anomaly where people just move around a lot more. And more often than not, you'll find that the segment that you would see high engagement and high attrition tends to be those under 29, where it's just part of their career growth. They're very engaged, they're very excited, but it's natural for them to want to move to the company and try something new. And there's nothing much you can do. So I would say that you definitely see that a lot in some of these different cases, but my first instinct is always query the data a bit more, open up segments, do an impact analysis on retention, right? If you're already asking that question, I'm likely to stay in the next 12 months, for example. Do an impact analysis. What are the highest impact drivers or dimensions that would keep people in the organization, and then look at segments that score low on those dimensions. And then we'll give you some clue as to why people are leaving.
I observe this trend of high engagement
Yeah.
and high attrition at the same time in 2 organizations because I changed job. It's very interesting because during the pandemic time and even post-pandemic, leaders are aware that communicate,
Yeah.
and also trying to understand whether the staff are coping well. It started from COVID because of remote work, so you actually don't really see your staff. Hence, all the more that communication is important to ensure that they are doing fine.
Yeah.
So these practice continue. So actually people feel that they are being engaged.
Yeah.
The leaders care, right? So coming to now, where we are the new normal, right? While this practice continue, and it's already taken as given that leaders must do that.
Yes.
Taken for granted already. So that moves up the baseline that leaders need to care. So engagement continue to be high, but attrition continue to be high. So I was a bit curious and I went to analyze data a bit.
Yeah.
The staying power of people used to be around 3 to 5 years, has moved down to 2 to 4 years. So people tend to stay shorter, taking care of their needs more than loyalty or whatever you call. Yeah, so that's like the change of human behaviors.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really good point, Joyce, because I feel like to a certain extent in Singapore we're spoiled by good leadership. If you look at all the power transitions around the world today, ours is probably the least noteworthy because there's nothing remarkable. The Prime Minister just changed after decades and life goes on as normal. And I think because of that, there's a certain expectation, a baseline expectation that we have of our leaders that they're good. And then compared to the APEC data that we saw earlier, it doesn't move the needle for us in engagement because we just expect them to do
It's not just the tender loving care of the, we now also expect the care pack to be a continuous thing. The multi-generation was an interesting thing, and also this timing side. I have a hypothesis that leadership used to have a view that retention is key. Okay? So I have a hypothesis to ask, is retention a key, or is the tenure that is now with us key? So if it's highly engaged and you perform during your tenure,
Right.
that suffice
Yeah.
on that. So it's asking the staff to change their view or asking leadership to accept, because they are not going to stay forever.
Yeah.
Just accept the fact
Yeah.
on that part. And it's a good result to have high engagement, pseudo, high turnover, that's fine, you have fresh ideas and so on, but it's a hard thing to swallow.
Yeah, it's a different goal. And I think what's really interesting to your point as well, that we see clients doing a lot more is being much more thoughtful how they offboard and come back into
Yeah.
life. You know, we want them to come back again. They're high talent, they've contributed well. We understand that they're restless and they want to look at other places, and that's fine. But let's offboard them in a way where we can bring them back again in a few years.
Yeah, I think it's also about how you segment your talent. So there might be parts of your workforce where it is recognised that at this point in their career or in this specific type of job role, that talent movement is more expected, so let's not be concerned about it. But then there might be other types of talent where actually it is pointing to a bigger issue. Half the Mercer team at some point has left Mercer and come back now. But then I think we've recognised that as a strength, right? Consultants often go, it's actually a great thing for a lot of consultants to go in-house for a couple of years in the middle of their career and come back. But then there has to be that huge focus.
The employee-employer relationship actually has shifted a lot after COVID, because I'm not sure how much that has been true here, but definitely in America now, for an employer to come and say, oh, you're part of the, say, EngageRocket family. Oh my gosh, that is so taboo. But the level of trust that employees have for the employer is very, very low. Because you look at the layoffs that happen, right? The moment something hits, is okay, sorry, you guys are gone.
Everyone, right? Yeah.
Not all of them, not all of them. But definitely the laws in the US favor the companies a lot more. And this idea, HR and leaders have to shift that concept of employee loyalty, and you have to all this family, because people are just not buying it anymore.
Yeah.
And you have to, exactly as you said, you're going to be, I don't say transactional, but you're going to be with us for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
This is the value proposition we bring to you as a company. You bring your best, and then when the time comes to move on, that's just life, and we're used to that. Yeah, so this was a big shift. It's a big shift. It's so taboo to say that. I mean, people make fun of you like there are memes about, oh, we're a family or whatever.
Yeah, I
People roll their eyes.
I don't like those words at work, either the work family or client love. I just don't think those words are appropriate. Love is complicated and painful, and it's also joyful. I shouldn't say this because it is our big mantra, client love, but I don't think it's the right word. You know, love is not too complicated. Client trust, or client respect, or client service, or client excellence, all of, and welcome to the family. Family is also really complicated and annoying and difficult. And I've come to work for that. I've come to work for it. I like Richard Branson's thing as well. He says something like, train employees so well that they're enormously employable, but treat them so well that they want to stay. And I think that, he says it, but I think that's quite nice as well, isn't it? You know, we want to nurture and grow our talent, but we also recognise that they have other options. But we just do the best that we can to give them the right experience in the workplace and stuff. And it is a transaction, it remains business, it's not a family affair.
I'm just wondering then how, not so much how important, but how valid is that survey question at this point in time?
It's a bit chicken and egg, I think, almost, isn't it? Because maybe if I don't see any future, I'm going to look elsewhere, or I'm looking elsewhere, and therefore I don't bother building a future. I guess it comes from both ways. But I think it's valid to ask the question, because if you've got a large chunk of your workforce that do not see the future progression, I think that's an indication of concern, certainly.
I would say they're they're like the baseline questions to ask around this. I see a lot of organisations asking at least 6 to 7 others in this area that are often more focused now on things like, is my day-to-day job helping me grow the skills I need for the future, and things like that look a bit more at the practical lens, not just kind of where people see themselves.
I tend to agree. I think as leaders, as HR, we have to a certain extent preached to the choir. Like those who do see the future, we want to invest more in them. So I think it's still worth checking that out. And there are always going to be those that want to develop and less than right. Like, please go make the world a better place somewhere else. That's perfectly fine. Yeah, but for those that do choose to stay, I think we owe it to them to figure out how do we make your career better in our organization.
My thoughts is, as much as we talk about how it's partly a joke but partly the reality on employer-employer relationship changing and how young people nowadays really don't stay that long, 3 months, 4 months and move. Actually, by default, when I see that, I just don't. But two things I want to make is, one, it's still important to ask those questions and it's still important to track intent to stay because there is also that tenure cut that we want to see, right? If your intent to stay is low in your first 1 year, there's a very big ROI question. There's recruitment costs, there's ramp-up costs, there's training costs.
Yeah.
If we don't recruit that ROI, especially during the first 1 year, then it's an issue. So I think that's still that importance there. And then the second one is, Peckham actually from PSG said this before. Why are we still looking at retention as a whole? It's actually retention of top performers that we should care about. Because there are people that we actually want to see
Leave.
retain, right? So it's actually the retention of top performers that you want to go the extra mile. And that's where the engagement side also is important. Like how you really make that effort to retain top performers. And then the rest, thank you very much. Yeah, please.
Yeah.
So I agree to that. I mean, it shouldn't surprise us that our most engaged, best performing employees are marketable because they are.
Yeah.
And we are competing for the same talent with everybody else and we have to do something that's different.
Yeah.
What we should think about is why do our employees who are not performing and not engaged want to stay? There's something that we should be doing around that so that we can change that because that could also be a push factor. That's a push factor. A push factor for top performers leaving, right? So there's both sides.
Brilliant. CheeTung, thank you so much.
No, thank you. I enjoyed the chat.
Joining us and Dorothy and the EngageRocket team, thank you for coming.